This episode of Navel Gazing is sponsored by valleygivesback.org. Adding a Valley charity to your estate plan creates a lasting legacy that tells future generations what causes matter to you. Your action will inspire others to follow your lead and make a difference. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley community forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Learn more at valleygivesback.org, an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Plan now, give later, and impact tomorrow at valleygivesback.org.
For hundreds of years we brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation signs of...
Hey everyone, welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indies weekly podcast. If you don't like the term podcast, and who does, call it a talk show, it doesn't matter. Follow us on Twitter at Valley Indie. Visit us online at valleyindie.org. My name's Eugene Driscoll. Today you're going to hear an interview I conducted about last week or so with Patricia Tarasovic of the Valley United Way and David Morgan of Team Inc. They're going to talk to us about the Food Security Task Force, a group within the Valley Council for Health and Human Services. Basically, the Food Security Task Force brings together area food pantries, shelters, soup kitchens to identify the need in the Valley, the capacity of those agencies working to fight hunger, problems with accessing food, and ultimately the goal is to create a sustainable Valley Food Bank network. That information comes from the website of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. That organization has played a key role in combating hunger in the region. We should also mention the Valley Community Foundation and the United Way in this effort. And you, because donations and funds set up within those foundations and organizations come from the public and allow nonprofits and organizations like food banks to do their thing. On a personal/programming note, I'm recording this introduction to the interview on Monday, February 12th, and like I said, I did the interview about a week ago. There's a press conference scheduled today, as I record this, in a few hours, actually, and I'm not going to be able to go there because the flu is run amok in my home. My wife has the flu. My little daughter, Emma, 5, has the flu. My son, Jack, has the flu, and he's had it since last Wednesday. And as of last night, he was in the emergency room at Yale, New Haven. So I'm trying to get Ethan Fry to cover this thing. Ideally, you're listening to this podcast within a story about the effort to combat hunger in the Valley. But I just say all that because it's going to be a little hairy this week getting things covered. You might notice a downturn in the amount of stories Ethan and I are producing at valleyindie.org. But anyway, this episode is sponsored by valleygivesback.org. And without further ado, here are Patricia Tarasovic and David Morgan talking about the Food Security Task Force. Joining me on the line this afternoon is Patricia Tarasovic of the Valley United Way and David Morgan of Team Inc. Thank you both for taking the time to appear on Navel Gazing.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I'm in the dark here about what we're going to be talking about. I got an email from Patricia talking about a new initiative, a grant-funded initiative that's happening in the Naugatuck Valley. I know both organizations that you're involved with do a ton of good things in the Valley. Patricia, would you like to explain to me what we're talking about this afternoon?
The Valley Council for Health and Human Services sought to formally establish a sustainable Valley Food Bank network. It's going to be governed by the Food Security Task Force, which David and I are co-chairs of. And it's a task force of the Valley Council for Health and Human Services, which is, as I said, co-chaired by us. And members of the Valley Food Bank are food pantries. We have 5 food pantries that are committed to implementing and strengthening best practices in food pantry operations including but not limited to service delivery practices. The project is going to raise awareness and understanding of food insecurity in the Valley. And it's also going to be resulting in new levels of community support and engagement, including but not limited to volunteerism, resource development for all member food pantries of the Valley Food Bank Network. And then last, we want to strive to establish a point of convergence for all future giving, support, and efforts towards addressing food insecurity in the Valley.
Can you describe the nature of the problem or the issue?
No, Jane, that's a great question, and we're not able to entirely answer it. When you look at the Valley, we have a lot to be proud of, but the reality is there are people who are struggling to get by when you think about basic needs, and this who are experiencing economic hardship. And in this particular focus, we're talking about food insecurity, which we define as a lack of assured access to foods, and more importantly, healthy foods. We still, the report you're referencing, there's a couple of them. There's the Valley Community Foundation's Community Wellbeing Index, and there's also what the Valley Council did with TEAM and with the Valley United Way. In the support of Prudential, we were able to produce the Valley Hunger Study. The reality is there's still 1 in 5 residents who are low income in the Valley, and that number shoots even higher when you look at young children in the Valley. It actually shoots up to 1 in 3. And so we don't exactly know what the full scope of food need is in the Valley, and that's part of the purpose of one of the charges for this group. Is we really wanted to answer 2 questions. Number one, what is the level of need in accessing food in the Valley? And then our second question was, what is our capacity to address that need? And we have 5 champion food pantries, Spooner House, Christ Episcopal Church, Salvation Army, Seymour Oxford Food Bank, and St. Vincent de Paul. These are 5 food pantries that do so much with so little. Folks are coming in and out their doors every week at various times. They each have different operating hours, and we're not able to really define the scope of that need. And part of that challenge is how we're able to report the need. So, some food pantries will say, we distributed, X number of meals. Another food pantry will say we distributed X number of bags. Another one will say we distributed X number of pounds of food. And so it becomes very challenging to tell a leader, a corporation, a donor, a legislator, or you, what is the need? And so that's actually one of our charges as a group, is to come away with a standard unit of measure on what the need is.
This is being funded, grant funded from the Valley Community Foundation. Is that right, Patricia?
Yes. We received a 3-year multi-grant, multi-year, $43,000.
That's $43,000 per year, or 3 years total in it?
Yeah, it was a 3-year
total.
$42,000 total.
Oh wow,
so the first year is $18,000, and then our second year is $13,000, and then the third year is $11,000. And the 3 primary areas of that grant, and the grant awardee is the Valley Council for Health and Human Services, which has tasked Pat and I to co-chair its food security task force. Just to give you a little background on the inner workings of the council.
Yeah, that council does. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
No, go ahead, Gene. That's okay.
I was just going to ask you. I know that council does so much. It's incredible. Can you talk to me a little bit about? Listeners might not have any idea what the Valley Council on Health and Human Services does. Can you explain it in general?
It's a partnership network of nonprofit agencies that serve residents of the Valley, and it works to strengthen the capacity of member agencies and community partners to provide high-quality health and human services in the Valley region. It was founded in 1993, so we're going into the 25th year anniversary celebration.
It's amazing. And then, David, in your role at TEAM, I know you don't have any hard and fast data at this point as to how many people are going hungry in the Valley, and that's one of the pieces of information you hope to determine by using this grant and setting up this task force of sorts. But just anecdotally, is the problem getting worse or better, just judging from what comes through the door at TEAM?
That's a very good question that I think is not an easy one to answer, because I often struggle with, if I were to answer that through the lens of team, I believe team has increased its ability and capacity to make the public at large aware of the services of team. And so it's hard for me to correlate that to, does that mean people are hurting more and more, versus is team just doing a better job reaching the hard-to-reach households that are struggling with any of the essential needs, whether it's transportation, housing, food, access to health care, and so forth. So I struggle with that one. I think the best way to try to answer that question is when you look at the Valley Community Index and you look at some of the hard data in there around economic well-being. Some of the things that stick out for me and that keeps me up at night is child poverty has nearly doubled in the Valley region since the year 2000. So that would be one I would offer as to cause us to scream from the rooftops and come together and trying to turn the corner to get better outcomes.
And I thought one of the sobering things that came out of the Alice report that the United Way, I guess all over Connecticut, did a few years back. I mean, we always hear low income, and sometimes I fear that people's eyes glaze over because we've heard that term so much, where the Alice report or poverty index, that Alice report pointed out that, basically, Valley Indy reporters are a paycheck away. How large the working poor essentially is in the Naugatuck Valley. And I guess that would play into this hunger study as well. Hi, this is Eugene Driscoll, most likely interrupting myself to bring you a message from our sponsor, valleygivesback.org. Adding a Valley charity to your estate plan creates a lasting legacy that tells future generations what causes mattered to you. Your action will inspire others to follow your lead and make a difference. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley community forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Learn more at valleygivesback.org, an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Plan now, give later, impact tomorrow at valleygivesback.org.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Gene. It gets what quote-unquote low income means. As far as for the purpose of the community index for which the Food Security Task Force really looks at, when we look at low income, we define that as, and the Valley Community Foundation's community index does the same, we look at 200% of the federal poverty level. So if you envision a single mother of one, that household income would be at or below about $32,000 a year. If you want to look at a household of four, the example of mom and dad with two kids, their household income would be at or below $48,000 a year, just to give you some context of what we mean by low income.
Okay, and then moving forward, perhaps you can explain, so obviously the task force has been formed. You now have grant money to get started and to at least study the issue. What are some of the goals? What will we see, and how long will it take? I would think you have to, I know one of the report that came out a year or two ago had said that basically the food pantries were all acting independently, and that there's a need to sort of have them work together and to better coordinate anything from hours of operation to supplies. So what are some goals of this task force going forward?
There's three components to it. Number one is bringing in a consultant, an expert in the art and science of bringing people together to work collaboratively toward a shared outcome, where the benefit is the individuals and families and households who are accessing these food pantries. And so that consultant is going to be focused on ensuring and supporting Pat and I to bring these 5 food pantries, to continue to bring them together, to talk about best practice, talk about shared data collection. So how can we move from different ways of collecting data to a universal standardized measure, so then we can begin to aggregate that all together. So the vast majority of the grant award is for an external consultant to help us in this work. And so he or she would not only be facilitating the entire group of the pantries together with Pat and I and others in the human services field, but he or she will also be doing one-on-one at the local food pantries to help support them on best practices, including data collection, but also service delivery option. We have some long-term visions around, people come into a food pantry in stress or crisis needing food. It is our belief that is the tip of the iceberg, that there may indeed be other complexities and challenges within that household. So how do we provide other linkages and referrals for those households who come into the food pantry? And so that consultant's going to help us dive into those strategies as well. And then briefly, the other two areas of the grant is to acquire food, actually partnering with the Connecticut Food Bank, where we can buy we can stretch the dollar further than any other place as far as acquiring healthy, nutritious foods that can help, and it's a very small amount, but to help stock some of these food pantries with healthy food options. So a very small portion of the grant is used to acquire food, healthy foods to put on these shelves. And then third, which is the smallest amount, is to do a community symposium and some other public presentations, including this one, which kind of surprised us. So this is our first test into these waters of trying to increase public awareness around the issues of hunger, and equally, if not more importantly, how people can address it and how people can become part of the solution.
But even like from United Way, I think that we tend to just be encircled by working with the food pantries, and we think that everyone knows that where they are and how to become connected. It's not on a daily basis, but we continuously receive calls from people in the community that where would they get food. And I must say that it does surprise me that that's just not common knowledge. So I think having these community symposiums are going to be so important, and just in terms of outreach. And also, too, I think as David said earlier, the food banks that are working now, they're a lean staff, and they do so much. They are the champions here because they do so much. And the opportunity to be able to provide the technical assistance, to be able to show them how they could operate in a manner in which they'd be able to do, I don't want to say twice as much work, but something that would be able to build some skills for them, and there'd be a lot of learning too, and even the data processing. I think it's going to be so much bigger than, we had it in print and we're planning to move forward, but I just think it's going to be just so huge in a sense of what we're going to learn, what they're going to learn, and the community will learn.
Are there any existing models or communities or regions that you're sort of borrowing this methodology from? Like when you were filling out the grant application, is there any community that is doing this already, that has sort of gone through this process to make, to tackle this issue?
Great question. There is no model in Connecticut where pantries are deliberately and intentionally coming together to work collectively. It's actually much easier to bunker down and work in isolation. The harder part is actually coming together with different operations and different ways of doing business. But we all have our common denominator are people in great need. So we are definitely paving a new frontier here as far as a regional collaborative network and addressing food insecurity.
I was just going to ask really quickly about the consultant. Where do you find a consultant who has expertise in something like this?
That's an excellent question. And so since we received the grant award from the Valley Community Foundation towards the end of October, we have been aggressively searching and vetting, and we are down to a final candidate that we believe we'll be able to announce as soon within the next week or two, ideally at the press conference.
Okay, and for our listeners, we're actually recording this in advance of a press conference that has been scheduled or tentatively scheduled for February 12th. And Patricia, I again rudely interrupted you. What were you going to add?
No, as David and I were, in step with looking at building this task force, we visited the Connecticut Food Bank. I don't know, David, it was like a year ago, August, I think it was. Was it? Yeah, and we made a connection with the Connecticut Food Bank. We toured it, but And then they came to one of our meetings, and one of the things that they had said was at that time that they were in the process of going around the state and doing an outreach to other food banks. And they were just so impressed with what the ambition and the what we were setting our sights on doing. And they, I think, were just moved by the idea that we would be their model program, in a sense of being a pilot, but we would be the model program because it just has not been done there out in the state.
And I may be asking the same question again. I apologize, but it's a lot for me to absorb, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world. But it's fascinating to me that there an existing model isn't out there. So when you were putting together this grant application, I mean, you had to know there was a problem or ways that you could get this grant money and help deal with that problem. Like, what specifically was sort of happening in the community that made you realize or that put you on this path?
Well, I can speak to that. Our United Way has our Corporate Volunteer Council. And back in 2005, we built Harvest House. And that simply was a 400 square foot structure that it was asking the community and corporate community and community at large to come out and do food drives, and the simple task of putting the food on the house. And then we collected thousands and thousands of boxes and cans, close to 100,000 boxes and cans. And then the food banks came on the last day of the build and took the food away. Well, we've done that every other year. And the food banks monitored the length of time that it stayed on the shelves, and it would stay several months in the beginning. And then around 2011, they were saying that it didn't last as long. By 2013, I clearly saw that it was lasting a lot shorter amount of time, and brought that situation to the Health and Human Services Council Executive Board and said, I really think we have a food insecurity problem here in the Valley based on that data alone. Because it was really the first time that collecting the food pantries together, they were giving us the messages that was happening. So I think that, right, David? I mean, that was kind of the data that we used, and that was the executive board from the council that said we'll form a task force and we'll address this issue.
But if I'm someone listening, I live in the Valley or I work in the Valley, is there anything I can do as average Joe citizen to get involved in this process or program or to help?
Well, that's a great question because at our last Harvest House, we created a website on the Valley United Way's website page. And it's through the efforts of the Corporate Volunteer Council, but Prudential Corporation really had a stronghold in this that allows people to do a virtual donation or a build of the Harvest House that they can at any time donate to the food pantries by donating cans of food. They can actually get a basket and select the food that they want to put in that basket. So there is a website at Valley United Way that you're able to do that. And the other thoughts are that getting involved in doing food drives, we will have postings of all of the food pantries and where they are located. And I mean, I think the community has just excelled, especially recently, at doing food drives.
I would contact the Valley United Way. They're a great arbiter as far as volunteer placement, linking prospective volunteers to any one of these 5 Valley food pantries, which again would welcome anyone in their doors to help with quality volunteerism.
I mean, the fact that in 2005 you do Harvest House, and the fact that the demand has grown so much to the point where you noticed, and now it's resulted in this task force being formed and a grant being sought and accepted. What's going on in our community? What are the challenges people are facing that they weren't facing in 2005? I mean, of course, the economy collapsed in 2008, the housing bubble and all that good stuff, but we sort of keep hearing that, well, things are turning around. Is that not the case? Are we still How many people are struggling in the Valley? Do you have any idea? And maybe I had asked that previously, but what's going on? Because unemployment, everything seems to sort of be, the numbers seem to stay the same, but this need is growing and growing and growing.
Again, I think the largest piece is, if you look at the community index, the biggest pieces that stick out is housing. Households are extremely cost-burdened. When you look at how much of their household income is simply going towards housing, some of those numbers in there are eye-opening. The other one would be the cost of child care, which the ALICE study speaks to very well, as far as, households that should be spending no more than 7% of their household income towards child care, in many cases are spending 15 to 21%, and in some cases 40% if they have two children, when you look at the cost of child care. So when you look at housing and child care, and the cost of living in Connecticut, the dollar doesn't go very far. And so, and then of course the complexity of being in a limited income household, like we talked about earlier, around low income, it just makes it very difficult. And it starts with food. I mean, food on the table is, the most critical basic need for a quality of life is healthy food.
Okay, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate it. And is there anything else you want to add before we end the program?
I do want to say that United Way, more than ever, has taken on the issue of tackling hunger. And I think that you'll hear more about that as well. But I do want to thank you for this opportunity, Eugene. I really do.
Oh, no, that's my pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure. All right, well, thank you both, David Morgan and Patricia Tarasovic, for coming on the program.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Gene.